Hi, this is John Berg with Bringg, and thanks for joining us today for our webinar on the best practices for successfully scaling delivery operations. My role here is I am head of product marketing, and I'm joined by Eunice. Eunice, want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, John. My name is Yunus Amar. I'm a product solutions architect here at Bringg, based out of Chicago. Very excited to be here today. Thanks for having me, John.
Great, and thank you to all the attendees. I see we have a really strong group here today. Throughout the course of this webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit it through the GoToWebinar dashboard here on the side. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to take a few of the questions. If at any point in this webinar you have a question that you'd prefer to ask one-on-one, please feel free to contact us via the website. And Eunice, myself, or another one of our solutions providers in your market will be happy to discuss your needs and help explain some of these concepts better and answer any questions you may have. So to get started, we're going to start with the obvious. Transformation is difficult. You know, 2/3 of leaders in enterprise business management are working on supply chain digitization. Okay, this is a journey, and again, those 2/3 recognize that it's a transformation. It typically takes years to be able to build a delivery program that can give your business that competitive edge in the Amazon era. The shift to digital and digital augmented logistics provides enterprises with the flexibility to meet growing customer demands for faster, cheaper, better delivery experiences. Okay, and this is a shift really in mindset for IT and supply chain executives to move from cost optimization, which is where the majority today are still focused, and to start looking at customer delivery experiences. And this is a really difficult transformation. There's a lot of embedded infrastructure and strategy that needs to be rethought. And this is why many of these digital transformations fail to scale. Capgemini Research Institute in December put out a great study called Focus. I think this was in December of 2018, where they said that the average enterprise currently has 29 digital supply chain initiatives in the ideation, proof of concept, or pilot stage. That being said, 86% of enterprise businesses fail to get beyond that pilot stage. They're stuck in the early stages and they're not able to get to scale. Now, this is really challenging for business leaders. Business leaders know that they need to deliver better experiences faster. They need to deliver from retail. They need to be accepting returns at retail. They need to be more agile in the fleets that they're using. They need to be able to bring down those delivery costs to maintain their profit margins. Now, one of the biggest challenges here is that all the business has these broader goals and the supply chain sometimes is unable to meet them, which is why, according to some economist research that came out earlier this week in February of 2019, 2/3 of organizations are starting to look beyond their internal IT teams. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at what are some of those reasons that businesses are challenged with scaling and what sets those 14% apart, and how can businesses rapidly scale their delivery operations while maintaining that logistical excellence. So when we look at multiple studies that show what sets people, those 14%, the elite, the businesses that have been able to scale their digital supply chain initiatives and delivery operations apart, there's three commonalities. The first is when they start a pilot, they're already planning for what this business is going to look like the day after the pilot, okay? Which very much relates to that third point here, which is that there's a shared vision across multiple stakeholders. So marketing is invested, business development and finance are invested, the C-suite increasingly is invested. The whole business has a vision and knows they need to be delivering. Figuring out how they're going to do that is very difficult. And that brings us to the second of these three challenges, going a bit out of order today, shaking it up, and that's agility. Businesses often will start by spending a few months defining their needs, and by the time they finish building their technology stack, months or even years later, a year or two later, it's no longer relevant. It's no longer relevant to the business's operational needs. It's no longer relevant to the market needs. There are new providers and different technologies available. So the scalers have a vision from the beginning. They have a shared vision for where they need to get to. They've planned for their pilot to be successful. They've planned to be able to reinvest in that pilot when it is successful, and they're agile enough to be able to reply to changing market demands. And now Eunice is going to walk us through the traditional approach and the new model that we're seeing in the market.
Thank you, John. So when we think of the traditional approach, we usually think of the waterfall methodology, which consists of defining all the project requirements up front before we start building those requirements and testing them. Given that we're in a market that evolves almost every day, this approach tends to fail because by the time you get to deliver something or roll it out, your requirements have changed, the market requirements have changed, and you typically, as an enterprise, find yourself, invest in more, or you found yourself that you sometimes run out of budget, and you can't go any further, and you're pretty much out of date. So the traditional approach tends to result in failure, and it's hard to scale following a waterfall methodology. So to John's point, we do recommend moving more towards an agile approach, which is what we would like to highlight in this slide here. Agile is all about deploying fast, with a smart solution that allows you to iterate, repeat, and refine. So how do we do that? We typically start with something called an MVP. An MVP is a minimum viable product. It's a targeted solution for a real world need, a targeted need, and a targeted pain point that we need to solve. And the idea is that we solve that problem as soon as we can, go to market as fast as we can, and collect feedback, learn as soon as possible so we can implement that feedback and try to get to the most optimal solution that we can scale. And that allows us to get to scale faster and with the right solution and with the most optimal costs, if you will.
Great. So just to sum up, if we were to look at this slide as 1 year, and the larger lines there are quarters and the smaller lines there are months, in your traditional waterfall build, you're going to spend a minimum of 2.5 to 3 months collecting your requirements from every stakeholder. And every stakeholder is going to think of all of the possible needs they may have. In an ideal scenario, you're looking at about 7 months, which we have reflected here in that initial build, though often speaking with enterprise businesses, they're looking at more like 18 to 24 months. And at the end of this massive investment, you then test. And most businesses following that initial test, following that pilot, don't necessarily have a roadmap for what comes next. So these tests, even if they're successful, they're really challenged with moving forward. With the agile approach, as Eunice said, you're starting with the off-the-shelf components and you're rapidly iterating. So every day you're going to look at the day before's performance, do, measure, and learn. So you're going to start building towards what you actually need versus what you've projected your need to be, which then allows you to scale much more rapidly, typically within about 4 to 6 months of start. So we're talking about going live within days, possibly a week or two, spending about 4 to 6 months in pre-scale, and then you're able to scale it across your business, roll it out with a fully customized solution that works. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. Eunice?
Yes. So if we want to compare or say why we want to go with Agile, to John's point, Agile is all about speed. So if we compare the traditional approach, it takes typically 1 to 2 years to get to a scalable state, whereas Agile allows you to get there within 4 to 6 months because you defined an MVP fast enough, you were able to collect feedback, and you were able to implement that feedback and and iterate quickly to get to a scalable state across various locations or markets. Another benefit of being agile is the flexibility, obviously. So the key thing here is that we're allowed, because it's a contained scope, it's in a smaller location, we're allowed to tweak it fast and almost every day to be able to get to that optimal solution that allows us to get to scale. And last but not least, I think this one speaks for itself. It allows you to get very quick time to value, meaning that you're able to go to market within days or weeks and see how the solution is doing, and be able to collect the pertinent feedback on it, and be able to implement it. And you're able to see a quick return on your investment versus following the traditional approach where you're kind of defining things up front and not knowing if that approach is going to pay off or not, especially in an aggressive and in an aggressive market that evolves almost every day.
And one of the really important things here that I think Eunice highlighted is changing definitions for what is meant when you're using technology and the word scale. So scale in this case is not necessarily that you are deployed across every location, but scale means that you have a stable platform, you have an optimized platform that's live across, let's say, dozens or possibly hundreds of locations, retail locations, for example. And now that you have this stable core in place that's fully customized, you know what your values are, you're able to roll it out with minimal friction across all of your locations.
So with the idea that we want to move from a traditional approach to agile, the mindset obviously needs to change. So as you can see, both approaches still follow the same steps. The only difference is that you can get to the final step in an agile approach much more quickly than the traditional approach, where during the design stage you would highly focus on the KPIs that you need to meet, the as I mentioned before, the key pain points that you're trying to solve to define the MVP, which will allow you then to build the MVP with a focused approach within a narrow scope, and as John mentioned, almost off the shelf, that will allow you to go to market quickly and collect feedback after you deploy the MVP. And then the idea behind the deployment is that you're able to be in market, in the field, collect feedback, measure, learn, run the analytics or the necessary analytics to see how you're doing from an operational performance standpoint, and from there you're able to build the optimal solution that will allow you to scale, which is the final step.
So just to highlight here, if you think about the mindset going into a build, and this is a big change for many organizations, they start typically, enterprise businesses will go through an extensive scope. In fact, this is one of the leading reasons in this Economist survey for why enterprise businesses say they're looking beyond their IT teams for these innovations, because the IT teams just take too long to define what a complete solution would be to a theoretical challenge. With Prescale, as you said, using off-the-shelf parts, you're using largely preset configurations to deliver fast value. But the biggest change here is the deployment focus. Instead of trying to deploy an end-to-end solution, you're using this do, learn, improve approach, where every day you have these rapid iterations.
Thank you, John. So we talked about defining the MVP. So what does the MVP consist of? It consists primarily of defining the optimal solution to a defined need. So we mentioned that you have a targeted need and a targeted market that you need to solve. And the idea is that we come up with the solution for that need. That way we, all the teams, everyone is focused on solving that problem and deploying the solution quickly to be able to collect feedback. So that allows you to see quick time to value, and at the same time, you can get insights, from the field, from the teams that are using your product or the product or the solution that was defined, and at the same time get insights as well, and analytics on the performance of the overall delivery operation. Based on those insights, you can identify areas of improvements, solve the problems that are encountered day in, day out by the operations team, and be able to scale to further locations, further markets, and as you do that, keep collecting insights which will allow you to get to a scalable state with the most optimal solution. So another topic that needs to be kept in mind when collaborating on building MVP is, who do we involve in building MVP? So based on our experience in working with customers across different industries, we defined two key people or types of personas, if you will, that will be involved in building MVP. So I would start with talking about a champion. A champion would be usually a single point of contact. This person is highly knowledgeable on the operation and also on what the technology needs, and they can work as a facilitator through all the key stakeholders in terms of defining what the needs are and keeping everyone focused on what the right solution would be, especially when we're defining MVP. The idea is that this person will help keep everyone focused on the scope of the MVP, so that we can go to market quickly and collect feedback and then iterate, repeat, and refine. Obviously, the champion needs to be supported by various key stakeholders that range from all departments that we can think of across the organization, from IT, finance, operations, and marketing, and all the other departments. Sometimes the C-suite from the beginning to get all the support and the sponsorship that would be required for the program to be successful.
All right, that's great. So just to keep us moving here, we're going to talk about some of the advantages, just wrapping up this section on the pre-scale agile methodology. First of all, as Eunice said, everything here that's built is repeatable. So we're building the process through which you can easily scale your delivery operations across all of your retail locations and all of your fulfillment centers. We also are setting up a centralized reporting and transparency dashboard for the business overall and for each team individually, so the right decisions can be made. And one of the most important parts here is we're empowering our teams on the ground. We're building that for what they need. We're building so that drivers have the flexibility that they need, the capabilities and the logic that they need. This is being done very quickly. Retailers are hurting. Brands that are going direct are hurting. 3PLs want to be more competitive. They want to stand apart, which means we want to be fast. We want to be live in days. We're talking about daily, rapid iterations, being very data-driven, using a continuous deployment cycle, and focusing on having that perfect fit in a cost-effective manner, which means we're building solutions. And when I say we, this is as the people building a delivery program, and the champion is doing this within their own business. They're defining what needs to be built based on the real world needs. They're defining what will be the best right experiment, what's the next thing we want to do, and they're building towards that and optimizing based on the results, being very data and operations focused. So moving into a few of the best practices, and we define these up front. The first best practice is we want to define our criteria for success from the beginning, okay? Overwhelmingly, businesses that define what will make my initial go live, your pre-scale deployment successful, they define that from the start.
And John, to your point, that could be a pain point that needs to be solved based on your current operation or a KPI that needs to be met. It's definitely about understanding the problem that needs to be solved and where it needs to be solved in a very targeted fashion.
Well said. So the next is number 2, minimize time to value. We know that the leadership team, and one of the biggest challenges that champions have is managing up. The leadership team is anxious. They're fearful of the changes that are happening in the market and what this means to the future of their business. Showing early value is really important. I'm going to brag for Eunice here for a minute. Last week, we were speaking with a major direct-to-consumer brand that also has somewhat of a retail presence. And by day 2, they were already talking about their business KPIs and how they were seeing the lift within their initial launch. They weren't only looking at their delivery KPIs because they started seeing the value of improving their delivery operations from the very start. I hope I didn't embarrass you too much, Eunice. So the third best practice here is, as Eunice said, we're going to build for real world needs. Don't spend too much time wondering about what ifs and planning every possible delivery exception you may encounter. When you go live, you're going to start to see those. And as you learn what are the most common and the most important, you're going to build for those. But build for what you see in the real world, and build for things that are going to be repeatable at scale. If you try to take on every possible scenario from the beginning, you're going to be stuck in months of hypothetical development.
And just to add on to that, John, I think this one in particular is our signature at Bringg. It's really around that. When you look at our product, it's built for what the field has provided in terms of feedback, and we tend to follow that approach when onboarding new customers or working with new customers on a certain delivery program. We try to understand what the real problems are in the field and try to solve them as soon and as quickly as we can. Go to market as soon as we can as well, so we can collect feedback and keep solving as we go while providing value, which is here. It provides a great combo between short time to value, and at the same time we're solving things that really matter and things that are relevant to the operation.
And I think that's a great way to our next best practice, which is to engage the right people at the right time. So Eunice spoke before about identifying your champion and having that person that he or she will own this delivery project from day one. They will collect the right inputs from the right stakeholders at the right time. They'll make sure that they're collecting the right KPIs so they can address each person's needs as they grow. It's very important that this person is empowered and that the key stakeholders serve as an advisory board that can also help them clear hurdles along the way, because as we know, nobody likes change. Change is never pleasant, and sometimes that executive support can really help clear a path forward.
And I think that goes along the lines with the people, process, technology trifecta. As we keep talking about people, process, and technology, it definitely is important to have the right people in place, because without the people, you might have the best process or technology, you won't be able to be successful if you don't engage the right people from the get-go. So it's definitely something that we would insist on. To John's point, having a champion who's fairly knowledgeable of the technology and the operation, or the market needs in general, to be able to be successful and drive success in general.
And I think this really relates to the next 2 points, which is at the outset making sure that you have a common vision. It's important that we know that we need to get from point A to point Z, and we know that this is a strategic imperative for the business to have competitively differentiated, better deliveries, or at least on par with our competitors, as soon as possible. Okay, and with that as our goal, we need to put that trust as an organization in the champion, and the champion needs to earn that trust and show that value to be able to say, I can get you there, which very much relates to planning for success. Okay? This means that you're going to think about what happens the day after I go live. Our focus is not in being able to test a solution, it's being able to scale delivery operations. Failure is not an option, which is why we as an industry need to remove the word pilot from our dictionary. Okay, pilots are tested, they're failed, they close, sometimes they're very successful, but they die on the vine because the right resources aren't available to continue growing them. Pre-scale presupposes that the business is ready, they're committed to doing what they need to succeed in the post-Amazon era, which means delivery, which means exceptional delivery experiences, which is why you want to be able to iterate and scale. Lastly here, as we talked about iterating and scale, in this rapidly changing market, we need to assume that markets are going to evolve, and that as you scale, your needs are going to evolve, which means that you need to start building on the premise and developing on the premise that your needs are going to change. You may need to engage additional fleets. You may need to change your terms with some of your fleets once you see what their SLAs are and how their customer ratings are. You may need to change because your labor force is changing, or because of changes made by competitors, or people in other, or even businesses in other industries that are raising customer expectations from your business. So having that agility is really important. And as you're allocating your budgets and your staff and your man hours, anticipate that you're going to need to evolve. Now we're going to jump forward to a case study so that we have time to answer a couple questions. This example is from a leading food retailer, from a leading restaurant retailer in South America. So if we look at, the 9 months from March of 2018 to December of 2018, they started with pre-scale. So when they started in March, they had a relatively low number of orders. We're talking about a few thousand orders per week, because they were only live in a few restaurants. It actually started with a few hundred orders and then scaled up. But when we look at what were we doing in those months of March, April, and May, that team was testing different solutions. They started with one integration with a bit of automation, and a lot more of it was manual. By the time the team got halfway through the month of April, getting closer to May, the team was able to automate far more, because now the system was better tuned. We were able to learn what they needed to tune, and we were able to add additional fleets. By the end of the month of June, we saw that everything was running smoothly, so we expanded dramatically to about 50, 60 more retail restaurant locations. In July, we saw a bit of change there. We tweaked, but we were convinced that we had the right platform, and together with this restaurant retailer, we decided that we were ready to start scaling this solution. So now when we look at the later half of their engagement over 2018, the scale has been phenomenal. They were able to get up to 150,000 orders delivered per week, okay, across 6 countries, serviced by 7 fleets. And remember, this is in addition to that, there were orders coming in from 8 different e-commerce aggregators and sites. So that's a tremendous number of integrations. There were over a dozen integrations, and they were able to move from 0 delivery orders managed by the restaurant to 150,000 delivery orders orchestrated, fully automated, hands-off by the technology over the course of 9 months. So when we look at what does this scale look like, through the month of August, all of their growth had been in Brazil, because we wanted to see what would this look like in Brazil. In September, they added Colombia, which meant adding a couple more fleets. It meant tweaking the solution, and Colombia continued to grow as we moved into October. In October, they were able to add another major country, Argentina. And you see that growth, and this growth isn't just from new retail locations in Argentina, but additional retail locations from Brazil and Colombia joining as well. And then moving in December, they added 3 more countries, which is why in December you start to see this compounding effect where They have more orders coming into their restaurants, more business opportunity. And at the end of the year, they were able to move from 0 orders managed in-house to 9 months later, 150,000 orders per week, fully automated, delivered from using their existing resources, and it's been a phenomenal success. And we continue to grow with them. So looking at the examples and the best practices that Eunice shared, we started small in March, April, and May. We were in that pre-scale stage. We were defining and learning and evolving. Once we had that core ready to go, we were able to rapidly grow to offer a differentiated customer experience. I see that we're almost out of time, so I just want to take a couple of the questions. Those of you that asked questions that we don't get to, we'll email you one-on-one. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to us via the website. So Eunice, our first question for you is about Agile and Prescale. This is actually a really good question. The question from, it looks like Lisa, was, Agile and Prescale are great concepts. In practice, I found that this is challenging for enterprises because we're used to traditional development cycles. What advice would you give my team as an enterprise facing this challenge?
That's actually a great question. And I totally understand where Lisa is coming from here, because retailers obviously feel the pressure to scale better and faster, which tends to result in lack of focus because you're trying to do too much too quickly. So this goes back to the point that we shared earlier about building an MVP, which will be a targeted product or solution for a targeted location that will allow you to basically measure and learn and optimize as you deploy it, so you can repeat and refine to get to a scalable state. And obviously, as you extend and you roll out to more locations, you can uncover or unveil additional things to improve with real feedback. And this also goes back to continuing building for real world needs. So the idea here is that you tend to be as agile as as possible. There's no no alternative or no way around it, besides embracing that model. And the idea is that you start small and build on that until you get to the final scalable product and solution.
Wow, that's a great answer. And by the way, if you have additional questions, you can reach out to us via the website, and we're happy to speak with you one-on-one. Eunice, we have one more question, and this is coming from Ricardo. He asked, how do you decide who should be the champion and who are the key stakeholders? Can I use an advisory board in place of a single champion? What do you recommend?
Wow, another great question, a loaded question as well. So I will break it up into 2 parts. So first, I want to discuss the the role of the champion and the engaging stakeholders. We touched on that in one of the slides today, where we mentioned that the champion is obviously an individual who's responsible for the success of the program. This is the key point of contact on the program. It's an individual who is supposed to know the market needs, the technology needs, and also the operation, so they can define what the requirements are. They can prioritize those requirements, and also they can basically interact with the key stakeholders and manage personalities or different needs or priorities throughout the program. I mentioned that the champion is a person who's knowledgeable of the product, the technology, the processes, but we're not talking about an expert technologist or a former delivery or dispatcher, but more of a person who will own the success of the program. They learn with everyone, and the idea is that we rely on that person to manage all the relationships and drive success. When we talk about key stakeholders, we talked about stakeholders supporting the champion, and those stakeholders could be, as we mentioned, from different departments. They can be part of, the executive or leadership teams. They can be from, IT, finance, business development, all the departments that might be involved in, in the success of the program. I think there was another question around having an advisory board in place of a single champion, if I'm not mistaken. What we typically recommend is that your key stakeholders are your advisory board. It is very important that you have a single voice driving the program forward. With advisory boards, sometimes you can, you tend to go, or you might go in a lot of directions, which would basically result in lacking focus, and you might not be able to deploy a targeted solution as fast as you can in a targeted market. So I would really insist here on making sure that there is a what we call a champion who will be the voice of the entire program while getting all the support and sponsorship that is necessary from the key stakeholders.
So I think that's a great point to end on here, which is, as you're building your teams, look at your key stakeholders or this advisory board as an executive team. And even remember, you can include some operations people on the ground in there as well that can provide that feedback and help the champion clear hurdles. As we close here, and I just, on behalf of myself and Eunice, want to thank you for joining us today. We will make the webinar available online afterwards for those that couldn't join us for the entire webinar. So don't worry if you have to jump off. But one of the really important points here to remember is that delivery is no longer an option that you can test, fail, and then move on to whatever is next. Delivery is a strategic imperative for your business. It's not only to compete with Amazon, but it's to meet those customer expectations as businesses like Amazon and some of your other retail competitors may have changed those customer expectations and raised them. So look at the resources you have within your business and see what can you do to help arm your champion, to help make sure that your program will be successful. I hope that some of the lessons we've learned and we've shared here today will help you in your journey. Thank you for joining us today. And if you need anything, please feel free to reach out via the website, and we're happy to discuss this with you one-on-one as well. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.